It's always telling of times and seasons to see which scripture passages are taken out of context and twisted to suit the norms and the purposes of the culture. Today, this is one of those. You'll see people using this passage to talk about all sorts of social justice, whether it's good social justice or not good. They'll say that this, Jesus was a racist, and this woman spoke truth to power and converted Jesus to not racist. And so he did for her what he wouldn't do for her because she was not of a Jewish race. This, of course, is garbage. It's not at all what is happening here. And if we put it into a bit of context, we can obviously see that. There are other ways that this passage is taken out of context, but I just want you to be aware that if you do ever hear anybody talking about this passage in a way that just seems utterly utilitarian for nonsense means, to just dismiss it and realize that that's not what's happening here. Because I'm going to tell you what's happening here. You ready? So let's look at St. Paul here first, because he gives us a good sense of what Jesus is actually doing. What Paul describes in his letter here to the Romans, Jesus is doing in a microcosmic way that he does by his cross and resurrection in a universal way, right? So we're going to look at Jesus' little experiment of this and then his big experiment of this, and it's all going to be understood in the context of Paul's letter here. So he says, brothers and sisters, I'm speaking to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I'm the apostle to the Gentiles. Now, Paul is very proud of being a Jew. He says in some places, he boasts, there's no better Jew than me. I'm the best Jew ever. You could hear just Donald Trump going on and on about what a great Jew Paul is, right? There's no better Jew. All other Jews, nonsense. Paul, the best Jew ever. And so hearing this come from St. Paul is profound. He says, inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles, I glory in my ministry. Basically what he's saying is, I have a gross job, but I love doing it. Why? In order to make my race jealous, and thus save some of them. Paul's talking about making the Jews jealous for their salvation. Jealous of what? Jealous that their inheritance has been given to somebody else because they were so perfidious, so stiff-necked, so stubborn that they refused to accept the Messiah when he came because they were so rooted in their own ways. Now let's jump back over here to the gospel. We're in Matthew, right? We're in Matthew 15. At the beginning of Matthew 15, right up before this scene, Jesus is arguing with the Pharisees and the scribes over how to do the dishes. Yep, how to wash bowls. That was the big, they were going to get him on that one, boy. You have to wash the dish a certain way. You got to make the bed a certain way, because that's what Moses said. And if you don't do that, you're not a good Jew. And if you're not a good Jew, you lose the inheritance. Right? This is what they're getting stuck on. And Jesus is so frustrated. Salvation is from the Jews. That's true. They are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, or at least they were meant to be. That's true, but they're throwing it all away. They're missing the boat, and Jesus is getting so frustrated that what he's going to do is he's going to say, fine, you guys don't want what I have, I'm going to give it to her. And she doesn't even deserve it. She's not even of the house of Abraham. She's a dog, which is to say a pagan. Trying to make the Jews jealous. Look what he did for her. He does this in Matthew 14 as well, when the apostles are in the boat and there's storms and waves and blah, 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 and there's boats sinking and Jesus walking on the water, and they're very scared. They doubt him. They doubt him. So what does he do? He gets out of the boat and he heals somebody. He's always trying to restore people's faith. But in a particular way, in this scene, he is threatening them. He's saying, if you do not accept this from me, I will give it to someone who will. You remember how Jacob got the inheritance Was he the firstborn son? No, who was the firstborn son? Yeah. You remember how Jacob got his inheritance, how he stole it undeservedly from his brother? His brother sold it for a bowl of soup. Again, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, I guess you could, but I'd make something better. But he sold it for a cup of soup because he was hungry. And that's how little he thought of his inheritance, or that it wouldn't really be taken away from him. And here the Jews are again. Their inheritance, the inheritance of Abraham, the covenant to which they have claim, is being threatened by the very covenant itself. You guys are so stubborn that I'm just going to give this away to whoever will have it. You remember in the parable that Jesus told, just to double down on this point again, because this is an important point. It's around this that all of everything else is going to spin. Remember when Jesus told the parable about a king who invited all of his nobles to come to dinner and they wouldn't come? What's he do? He sends his servants out and says, go out into the highways and byways and just get everybody. Bring them all in. And what will I do with those who didn't come? He destroys them. They not only just don't get to come to dinner, they get murdered. I guess it's not murder, it's execution, right? Because it's just. This is the situation the Jews find themselves in here and now with Jesus, with this Canaanite woman. So Paul says here, for if their rejection, the rejection of Jesus and their being rejected, is the reconciliation of the world, what does that mean? It's from that rejection that Jesus here is beginning to give, which is ultimately the mission, right? To give to the whole world the reconciling grace that he came to give first to the Jews. Not exclusively to the Jews, but first to the Jews. He's starting to give it out a little bit early because they're not accepting it. But also they reject the gospel after Jesus' resurrection, persecute the church, which does what? They strike the shepherd and the sheep go, poof. They've just sent all of the apostles now into the whole world to preach the gospel to the world. And this is a good thing. I don't care what your crazy history books say today about Christopher Columbus or Cortez or all these other people. When they bring priests along to convert people who cut out each other's hearts and chop off each other's heads and kick them down temples and pyramids, it's a good thing that they know who Jesus is. It's a good thing that the gospel comes to them, because not all religions are made equally. In fact, there's only one religion that is made for the purpose of salvation, and it is Christianity. And this is what Jesus is trying to get across to the Jews. There is no salvation apart from me, he's saying. I am the thing that you're looking for. And you're so fixed on the human customs and traditions that you've built out of the law of Moses that you don't even recognize me anymore. And if they can't recognize Jesus, who is the substance of the covenant, that means they already have lost their way. And they're not really even good Jews anymore. Because if they were following the law of Moses the way Moses intended, they would have seen Jesus and recognized him, because they would have been following him the whole time. Right? So this is not Jesus changing his mind. It's not Jesus having truth spoken to him who is power. It's not Jesus, being a bad guy and now being made a good guy by the bravery of this woman. No, in fact, it is Jesus himself who is showing mercy. And he's doing it not for the sake of this woman. He's doing it for the sake of the Jews that are with him, that they might come to have faith in him, because that's why he came. Ultimately, to gather the lost sheep of the house of Israel into himself. No longer that they might be Jews, but that they might become known, as they are known in the early church, as Christians. Jews who have matured from the manure of the old covenant. I don't mean that in a detracting way. In the fruitful soil of the old covenant, into the blossoming tree that is the church, that spreads her branches to the whole world and digs her roots deep into the soil of the word and receives the water of the grace that comes down from heaven and protects and houses and saves all who will find shelter under her branches. There is no salvation outside of Jesus, and therefore there is no salvation outside of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, which is his body. That's how we are saved, by being made a member of the body which ascends to heaven. There is no ladder going to heaven apart from Jesus, and he's more like an elevator. There's just one box. You miss the box, you don't get in. Not like an escalator where you can get on any old step that you want. Right? Getting into the body of Jesus, made a member of his body, who is the Word, the substance of the covenant, that saves us, being brought into him by being baptized, by receiving his body, blood, soul, and divinity, the most holy Eucharist, becoming what we eat. Right? By becoming a member of his body, as he ascends to heaven, so also we ascend to heaven. As he sits at the right hand of the Father in glory, so also we sit at the right hand of the Father in glory. As he sees the Father and knows the Father and loves the Father, so also we see and know and love the Father. And as the Father sees and knows and loves his Son, so also are we seen and known and loved by the Father. That's how humanity is reconciled to the God whom we have rebelled against, by being made a member of the Son, the one who has not rebelled against the Father. And so just as it was really, really, really important for Jesus to try to kick the Jews in the pants and say, get your act together, wake up, I'm here. 2,000 years later, they still don't get it. They're not supposed to be Jews anymore. They're supposed to be Christians. Just as St. Paul was saying and has said in another place, I would give up he's being hyperbolic here, he would not actually do this. I would be accursed. I would count myself accursed and give up my own salvation if it meant getting the rest of my people into heaven. That's how much he loved his Jewish faith. That's how much he loved his Jewish brothers and sisters. He said, I glory in my ministry to these Gentiles, these stinky, nasty Gentiles whom I spent my whole life not liking. I glory in that ministry to make my Jewish brethren, my race of Jews, jealous so that they'll wake up. If it's that important for Jesus and Paul who knew Jesus better than anybody else, perhaps even better than St. John, and this is their priority, it needs to be our priority as well. You and I enjoy a gift that we did not ask for and a gift that we did not deserve, the gift of faith. Strong or weak, everyone in this room has it, a faith in Jesus. A faith that by which we are drawn into the waters of baptism, the regenerative waters of baptism that make us a member of the body of Christ. A faith that allows us to walk up, and though eye is deceived, and ear and taste and smell and touch and sight is deceived by the presence of the accidents of bread and wine, we nevertheless have the faith that by Jesus' own words, that bread and wine are made into the body and blood, that we walk up and we receive and we are transformed into that which we receive. We have that faith, but there are so many that we know and love that do not. And it's not okay. Because they may not go to heaven. Now, we may not go to heaven either, but that's not going to be because of any reason but our own fault. We do know for sure that Jesus saves through the waters of baptism, the power of the Spirit, and his body and blood in the Eucharist. We know that for sure. He said that. We don't know of any other way to get to heaven apart from that. Why would we chance a blind road to a road that's well lit, smooth, and paved for us already? That's got signs that says, please come this way for heaven. And yet we are content to let family members and friends whom we say we care about walk the dark and uncharted road that leads to where? God only knows. But probably not heaven. Because we have fallen into the belief that comes from apathy that simply because I'm born into this world, God's mercy, presumptuous as we are, is going to just drag me kicking and screaming into heaven. It doesn't work that way. You don't go to heaven because you're born. You go to hell because you're born. That's what original sin has done to our race. But by virtue of the sacraments which has come to us by Jesus taking the flesh and being crucified and dying and rising and ascending to heaven, we now have the way, the truth, and the life which leads to the kingdom, which Jesus has gone forth to prepare for us. But we have to have something done for that to happen. We cannot remain as we are. And we cannot be content to say, I love you, to someone we know is not on that road. Paul was willing to make a fool of himself to convince people that they needed to be Christians. He was willing to lose friends, to be stoned, to be exiled, to be ultimately murdered. Do we have the same conviction that this is the way? There is no other. And if I say I love someone who's not on that road, have I done everything that I can? Which starts with me, myself, living it as if I believe it, right? People believe examples long before they believe teachers, right? Am I doing everything I can to draw those who want to be Christians because they say they're Christians, even though they're not Christians, into the body of Jesus? Am I doing everything I can to help my Presbyterian mother-in-law? Am I doing everything that I can to help my Baptist father-in-law? Am I doing everything I can to help my evangelical second cousins, dogs, aunts, stepsister into the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church because I say I love them and I want them to be in heaven? And I know for sure this is the way. Y'all, this is the true hallmark of love. Am I willing to love Jesus enough to change my own life to reflect the gospel? And do I actually love my neighbor enough to tell them the truth, that they're not on the road to heaven, but you know the way, and you ask them to follow you, and you lead them to your credit, to their salvation?